The Independent National Electoral Commission has withdrawn its threat to suspend the September 19 governorship elections in Edo State over the possibility of violence, explaining that the rethink was based on the implication of a constitutional crisis. Such decision will trigger if the election is not conducted. INEC's National Commissioner for Information and Chairman of Voter Education Committee, Festus Okoye, assured the people of Edo State of the resolve of the Commission to go ahead with the governorship election as planned, adding that the political parties have complied with INEC's notice over the threats of violence. The Commission said out of 14 items required for the preparation of the governorship election, 9 had been implemented. It justified the deregistration of some political parties, explaining that they had no verifiable address while their telephone lines were only traceable to business centers. And so I want to start with you on this. Wasn't INEC aware of the constitutional implication before it said, I am going to cancel the election because of violence?
I think they were very aware. In fact, if you recall, before this whole brigandage and brouhaha in Edo State politics, INEC had said, you know, the elections, because of the occasion of COVID-19, some people had raised objections as to, should we still go ahead with conducting elections at a time like this? And we have those staggered elections in Edo and Ondo State. And INEC had said repeatedly, we have to hold these elections because the political office, you know, have a time span, you know, and they are entrenched in the Constitution. So if you extend them, then we might be heading for a constitutional crisis. So INEC was very aware. But again, as the electoral umpire in the country, they also understood that to deliver a fair and credible elections, you need the peaceful atmosphere. You need the collaboration of all the stakeholders, as it takes more than INEC to deliver that sort of election. You need the political parties, you need the people, you need the security agencies buying into this as well. So I think after weighing the options of what we are seeing in Edo State, for INEC to say 9 out of 14, I think that's a pass mark. But the rest of the items yet to be met, how crucial are they? I mean, there's no gainsaying that anything doing is what doing well. Yeah. If we are not going to prosecute an election that is worth the while, I think we need to weigh our options again. But I think that INEC was very aware before they made that threat, and it's good that they've withdrawn it. This should be about the Edo people, like we keep re-emphasizing, you know.
All right, Dr. Latif.
Well, I mean, INEC, Festus Okoye was also on this program a while ago, and he was asked a question on this program about the implications of conducting elections in the face of COVID-19. And he had made it clear then, at the same point that he had made now, that Section 178, subsection 2 of the 1999 Constitution does not allow room for an extension of the election because of the implications as to the tenure of the governor. But again, it's also important to know that it was INEC itself that first raised alarm about threat of violence in Edo State in the lead up to the gubernatorial elections. And INEC had held a meeting, I think early last week or the other week, just before the crisis erupted in the House of Assembly. And they had expressed concern about, you know, the threat of violence in Edo State and the conduct of the politicians. And INEC had promised that it was going to meet with the campaign councils of the various political parties involved in that election in Edo State. And I hope, and I want to suspect, that it was on the basis of the interaction with the political leaders of Edo State that INEC is saying, well, it will go ahead no matter what happens with the election. But I think the major issue here is about the politicians in Edo State. They need to allow peace to reign. This election in Edo State should not be a do-or-die affair. Already as the campaigns commence, you can see the tension building up. I mean, the People's Democratic Party was supposed to go for a campaign in some part of Edo North. But they had to suspend that proposed campaign because they said they didn't want to put the lives of their members and supporters at risk. Based on their own investigations, they thought that that would be an unfriendly place to go and campaign. So caution is important. Leadership is important now even more than ever. And then the security agencies have their job cut out for them. And I keep saying that in this particular election or any election at all, the security agencies, particularly the police, should not be seen to be assuming any partisan stance. This usual, excuse that they got orders from wherever. The police have a responsibility to do only that is lawful. If they do not do that, then they will further complicate the situation. September 19 is just around the corner. It's almost here. And I think that, there should be an attempt also by civil society stakeholders to provide an opportunity for dialogue. If possible, for them to sign, what is that letter? A peace accord, publicly for every, Nigerian to see it. Let us see an attempt in Edo State, by the main gladiators to at least give us an assurance that they will not turn this particular election into a warlike activity, because that would then not be in anybody's interest, either the politicians themselves or the people or the stability of the environment.
Okay, let's see if we can take one more story. There's another story there. Okay. All right. Okay, we cannot take one more story. So
meanwhile, if we still have time, there's this unresolved matter, again, of the conflict within the House of Assembly. The 17 lawmakers claim that they do not have access to the House because, of course, that had been taken over by the state government that is curiously renovating that legislative assembly at this time. And they continue to sit in an undisclosed location or in a private location, if we may say so. And I think they need to be reminded that the work of the Legislative Assembly can only be conducted in the designated place, in the officially designated place. So all those meetings they are holding in private locations are of no consequence. They are null and void.
They're not binding on
and I hope that, before the election day, there will be some form of resolution, or perhaps some people will go to court on this side or that side, because you will recall that the speaker that was purportedly removed, he himself is insisting that he's still the legitimate occupant of that seat of the speaker. These are the kinds of things that can create tension and result in violent confrontations. Because don't forget, these members of the House of Assembly, they all have either their members-elect or their full members. They all have constituencies. Yes. And it's their constituents that will come out. And each one of them will be, I imagine, a major mobilizer in his ward, in his, local government. And that, again, is where we should be focusing our attention, because even as politicians, they have a role to play. Yes. And somebody should be talking to them. The Oba of Benin has met with the main gladiators. I hope that they will listen to His Royal Majesty. And then don't let us forget that there are other political parties involved in this. Oh, yes. We're not hearing the voices of the leaders of those other political parties. Have they considered the space
We've not heard anything yet. Let's watch the space. That's all we can. Thank you guys so much. That's all we can take on Headline News. We'll take a short break. Now when we return, we'll have the trio of Rotus, Odiri, Maka, Wilson, and Aaron Akarijola to give us updates on Africa, global business, and COVID-19. Stay with us. Welcome back. Still a morning show right here on the Rise News channel. The dependable Rotus Odiri is here to give us Africa Business Update. Rotus, over to you.
Good morning, Rufai. Good morning, Doctor, and good morning, Adesowa. We kick off with a tweet from the Statistician General of the National Bureau of Statistics, Dr. Yemi Kale. We jumped on this when we saw this yesterday on the Global Business Report. We'll have the tweet up there for our viewers. He said that the Q2 2020 unemployment and underemployment report is to be published tomorrow, Friday, the 14th of August, by 8:30 a.m. As you all know, I've talked repeatedly about the lack of data on unemployment situation and the need for this to be updated. The Minister of Finance also, we talked about it, broke it on this show. The Minister of Finance told us a few weeks ago that this would be coming. So here it is. Now, just for the sake of refreshing the memory of our viewers, Let's put up where we are as at Q3 2018. So this is the most updated data we have, again, as of the third quarter of 2018. Working age population 15 to 64, 115.5 million people. The unemployment rate is at 23, well, as at Q3 again, 23.1%. Number of unemployed, 20.3 million Nigerians. Number of underemployed Nigerians, that is working in a job that is beneath your qualifications, 18.2 million. If you combine the rates of unemployment and underemployment, it is 43.3%. Move on to the next slide, because there's more data here. Female unemployment is at 26.6%, male is at 20.3%. This is the one here that really bothers a lot of people. Youth unemployment, ages 15 to 35, 29.7%, underemployment is 25.7%. If you combine that, youth unemployed, underemployment, it is 55.4%. So, yeah, we'll get the data. I should ask you all to give us guesses as to where you think these figures will be for Q2 2020. Also, will the MBS also give us data on how COVID-19 has affected the unemployment situation in Nigeria? This data has to be more frequent. Michael Wilson, every Thursday, and he will hopefully join me again today on the Global Business Report. Michael Wilson and I on Thursday always talk about U.S. jobless claims. It just so happens it falls on Thursday. In America, folks who are out of work file a claim saying that, hey, I'm out of work and I need benefits. They take the data from those claims and they compile them. When COVID-19 hits, the numbers jump. But every week you get that data. So we need to have this data, and it needs to be more up to date. Also, what do you do with the data? What do we now do with improving the unemployment situation in Nigeria? I think we should be braced up for some ugly numbers tomorrow morning. Unfortunately, it comes in at 8:30, so I would already be done with my segment here, so I probably won't get an update. We'll get an update later on the Global Business Report, probably talk about it on Monday. We move on to South Africa. The South African governor of the Reserve Bank he made some very honest statements yesterday. This was a virtual speech he gave that was broadcasted by the University of Pretoria. Let me give you some background before I read. Well, let me read what he said first and give you the background. He said the problem is that formally adding an extra mandate to the South African Reserve Bank in the context of our propensity for stagflation could encourage policy mistakes and weaken credibility. So let's just stick here for a second. What has been happening in South Africa is that because they entered a technical recession before COVID-19, because growth is expected to contract by 7% this year, because unemployment is at 30%, if you include those who have stopped looking for work, it's actually up to 40% or maybe 50% in South Africa. There has been pressure on the South African Reserve Bank to stimulate more growth in the economy. What Governor Kyango is saying is that, look, there's only so much that I can do. Stagflation, by the way, we've talked about it on the show. You've got high unemployment, you've got rising inflation, you've got, falling growth. He's saying that I can't do much more than monetary policy. Let's go to his second quote. He has a second quote after that one because it was a long quote. We broke it down into two. And he talks about quantitative easing. He says, why we would all like South Africa to reach permanently high growth? This is beyond the powers of a central bank. We're in very difficult circumstances, but QE, that's quantitative easing, isn't the answer. We need to focus on real solutions. And those real solutions is referring to the fiscal side of things. There's only so much he can do. His mandate is monetary policy, benchmark interest rate monitoring, and keeping inflation in single digits. He can't do much more than that in terms of stimulating growth for the South African economy. I thought it was very, very honest comments coming from him yesterday. And then finally, we've got over to the NC, the Nigerian Content Development and Monitoring Board. They are commissioning their virtual tower today. So that's their tweet. Today, President Buhari will virtually commission the Nigerian Content Tower. The Minister of Petroleum Solutions, Chief Timi Presilva, will be there. Group Managing Director of NNPC, Mr. Kiari, will be there. Governor of Bayelsa State, this is taking place in Bayelsa, Governor Duye Duri will also be there as well. And then we can look at a few images that they tweeted out of the tower. It looks pretty impressive. And so it's going to be the virtual tower commission. I think it's happening 11:30 a.m. this morning, and we should might actually be broadcasting that live. Just to remind our viewers, the Nigerian Content Development and Monitoring Board, established in 2020 by the Nigerian Oil and Gas Industry Content Development Act, and invested with the mandate to make procedures that will guide, monitor, coordinate, and implement the provisions of the Act signed into law in 2020. And we're looking at images of those that will be taking place there. So it's all about increasing, the productivity of the value chain as far as oil and gas is concerned. So we look forward to that being commissioned virtually again because of COVID-19. And that's our updates. I'm looking forward to. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, quickly. Well, congratulations to the Nigerian Content Development and Monitoring Board. From what we've seen, quite an impressive piece of architecture there. They're also commissioning a 4-level car park, a gas plant, and then, of course, that building that we saw. And the interesting thing is that this was handled, we're told, by local contractors,
yes,
not foreign contractors. So it's also a demonstration of local capacity in this particular area. But I'd like to ask you about the 50 billion, or was it 50, I think it's $50 million that the NCDMB announced in July, which was approved by the Governing Council to support research and development within the value chain in the oil and gas industry. How far have we gone with that? Do we have information? Have they started disbursements for research departments in our various universities and the provision of many of those facilities that they will say they will make available to empower Nigerians? I don't know whether you have any information with that.
Not at this time. I do know that last I checked, they said that they would proceed with that. And look, the government has been, making strides in transparency. So the full disbursement hasn't taken place. It's going to be in tranches, but they started work. It's just that we haven't quite seen that yet. What we want to see is the actual research reports that's going to come out of these universities. So not full steam ahead hasn't quite taken place, but it's promised to happen soon.
All right, thank you so much, Rotsu. So we're going to move on to Michael now. Michael Wilson joins us now from London. Michael, good morning.
Good morning. I'll start you off with China, first of all, fairly sluggish. Now, that's ahead of this big meeting over the weekend between the US and China, between their top trade negotiators, to actually work out how this phase one of a trade deal is actually going at the moment. Quite strong rumours that China has only bought a quarter of US exports that it actually had agreed to do. So we'll see how that goes. Japan's Nikkei averaged a nearly a 6-month high, driven by strong gains in semiconductor stocks, with investors sticking to hopes, and I think they're pretty thin at the moment, that that the Washington politicians will agree the stimulus deal for the United States, but it all looks fairly stalled at the moment. US stocks, well, let's have a little recap of that. They managed another strong session yesterday. S&P coming within touching distance of its previous closing record high. And yesterday's, now this is the reason for it. We got some quite interesting inflation figures out of the United States yesterday. They were hotter than expected, and which implies that price pressures are resuming. Now, normally we don't like price pressures too much, and we certainly don't like inflation because it tends to erode our way of life. But the fact of the matter is that if you're seeing little signs like this, then it sort of points, and I'd say sort of points towards economies beginning to recover. So that was why that was actually quite high. But whether this is actually localized to the United States, we're seeing a bit of it here and a bit in Europe. Only time will tell, I'm afraid. Sorry about the cliche, but that's the way it is at the moment. European stocks, they sort of had a decent session yesterday. They were buoyed by the apparent plateauing of infection rates and optimism over the vaccine we were talking about yesterday, and investors choosing to set aside, therefore, the gridlock in Washington over the US stimulus package. Again, I don't think that's a wise thing to do, but we got this buy anything mood basically yesterday, and today's European session is slightly softer open, I think. But the positive sentiment yesterday continued despite those really poor UK Q2 GDP figures. Now, let's drill down into them, shall we? Because I think these are quite important. The headlines were saying that a fifth of our economy has actually disappeared. That's true. But drilling down, the more immediate focus was on some of the positive things that came out of it. For example, solid expansions in manufacturing and construction, and not just through the UK through May and June, but also in the rest of the EU as well. The main reason for this huge drop compared with other countries, particularly in its European counterparts, was that our lockdown was much later and was much deeper than Europe. So, and if you look at the OECD figures, and the OECD has not always been a friend of the UK economy. This is rather boring, but I'll give you a minute. It's called the Composite Leading Indicator, the CLI, and that showed that in July, UK was leading the pack in terms of recovery in the UK, in the euro area. Now, nobody's denying that what's happened is very, very serious indeed, and it will take a number of years to somehow shake off the effects of this pandemic, and it may well change the whole business landscape. But we'll see. But that's what, drilling down into those figures, I only repeat them. We didn't really get time to talk about them yesterday. But anyway, this is what the markets have been looking at since we last spoke. And as Rotus was saying, yeah, so today at 1:30, we get the weekly jobless claims numbers in the United States. And again, this is a difficult one to predict because we've seen rising spikes in coronavirus cases across the US. A couple of weeks ago, this concern was validated with initial claims and also continuing claims higher. And then we got last week's surprise falls to 1.18 million in the week, and 16.1 million, down to the lowest level of unemployment since the 10th of April. So we're back to this stimulus thing, unfortunately. The big question is, given the expiry of that $600 a week benefit that the unemployed were getting towards the end of July, what's going to happen when we come to the cliff? I think we already probably have come to the cliff, but something will need to be done. So let's just see that maybe continuing claims will fall to below 16 million to 15.89. That's the sort of market consensus right now. Of course, it could go the other way if there's another outbreak of the pandemic. Commodities, finally. Oil holding on to its gains after a rather bullish IEA crude oil inventory report. There's more gasoline demand, and there will be a battle for market share and all the rest of it. That may depress the oil price very, very slightly, but the feeling is that crude oil production will ramp up going forward. That'll put a lid on our oil prices. But if you look at the OPEC forecasts and also the latest view to battle the battle of the oil market, the battle for market share will intensify going forward into the fourth quarter of the year. So that could see an increase in the oil price. And our good old friend gold stocks have by and large been moving higher, so there's less appetite for something that tends to bring you comfort in times of risk. But I have something for you from the market here. It should continue to stabilise. You remember it's been touching that kind of $2,000 level for some time. Over the next few months, the upside target of the market is now $2,300 an ounce. So we might see a big change there. Again, I don't wish to predict these things. I'm just telling you what the sort of mutter about the market is right now, and that's the global view.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Michael, for that. I just wanted to talk about, the U.S. debacle now. The Republicans and the Democrats are still miles away. That's what Nancy Pelosi says the other day. But it's beginning to bring up a new trend. In New York, for instance, a sizable amount of hotels, the government is not giving those hotel rooms to people that are homeless, that have lost their homes because they can't pay their mortgage due to this COVID-caused crisis. I mean, what can you say about that? Because this is snowballing. It's getting out of hand.
Well, it's not a bad idea, is it? Because a lot of residents of New York have left, took it upon themselves to leave New York if they could afford it as rapidly as possible, because they regarded it as what they described as a petri dish of disease, which it probably was a few months ago. And still, they're getting no firm view from the mayor of New York exactly where the pandemic is. He probably doesn't know, but they're getting no indications of that. So I think it's probably quite a nice move for hotels to do that. But you have to point yourself towards the conclusion that no business lasts without making money. And if they're not making money out of hotel rooms, then those businesses will not survive. I think there will be a huge change. When we talk, let's hope we do, maybe in a couple of months' time, towards the end of the year and post-election, maybe things will change. Joe Biden gets in. I think you could expect to see a few more moves like this. But government money is not endless, even though the Fed has said it will keep going and it'll support the economy for as much as it takes, for as long as it takes. You have to draw a line under these kind of debts at some stage, and we will all be paying for this in the years to come. So there's a short-term thing, good, long-term, unsustainable, I would say.
Well, two quick questions, Michael, about the UK. The Shadow Chancellor is saying that government will need to do what is called targeted financial backing, because it is assumed that the government is not doing enough to address the challenges that will come with the recession. Now, is there a conversation around this, particularly in the context of concerns about the possibility of a second wave of infections? Now, secondly, the UK is changing how it calculates COVID-19 deaths. Why is that important? And will it make any difference?
Okay, so first of all, I think what if there is a second spike in the pandemic, the Chancellor won't probably be making an autumn statement. So we won't have a budget in the autumn either. Targeted loans, targeted help for businesses. Yes, I can see that. I was talking to somebody from the Federation of Small Businesses, and I believe, just like you do, that they are really the backbone of any kind of it, calling for a lot of improvements in terms of business rates and the rest of it. So that could be seen as targeted. I think what his worry is, he is sticking by this ending the furlough at the end of October. And anything which kind of chamfers off, if I can put it like that, the cliff edge, will probably be seen as a good idea. This is what politicians do. So he's not acting as Mr. Moneybags and all that. He's acting as a politician, I think, in this. But again, it's the old thing. We are going to have to pay for this one way or the other. And not all small businesses actually need that kind of help. All they need is a relaxation of red tape, less time spent in administration and more time doing what they're good at, which is developing their products. And I think if that were to come out of this, that would certainly help. It'd be a long-term thing, though.
Okay, I asked you about the UK changing how it calculates the number of deaths and whether that's important, whether it makes any difference.
Well, calculating death is a science which goes right over my head. I have absolutely no idea. I mean, I know what you're saying. I think that the calculation of deaths is one thing. I think much more important than that is progress towards a vaccine and the R rate, the actual infection rate, because deaths are very, very complicated indeed. I mean, some people are dying, as they are in your country, of other symptoms as well as COVID-19, and some are dying of COVID-19 on its own. It's a very, very difficult calculation to make.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's A-levels resulting in the UK today. We'll keep ourselves posted on that too. For updates on COVID-19 pandemic, Aaron Akerjala is here with us. Aaron.
Good morning to you, Rufai. Good morning, Adesua.
Good morning.
Doctor.
Good morning.
All right, let's get straight into it today, as we still are in the staggering number in terms of COVID-19 infections around the world, 20 million plus. Let's look at the numbers today. And at the moment, from the data from the Johns Hopkins University, we stand at 20,624,316 at the moment, and getting closer to 750,000 deaths in the world. Now, let's just run you through quickly where major things are actually happening, and because we've spoken about the second wave almost kicking into full gear. But in India, let's tell you that India have actually surpassed 47,000 deaths recorded in that Asian country. As a matter of fact, yesterday they recorded 66,999 infections for Thursday alone. Speaking about India and how things are actually playing out there, not really good, understanding that over to date, 2.4 million registered cases have actually been recorded in India, and things are really, really not looking good. But let's see if Narendra Modi and his team can help manage what is the situation in India. Moving away from India, let's say that France also, we're beginning to see things. Okay, Venezuela. Okay, Venezuela communications minister has also tested positive for COVID-19. Jorge Rodriguez, it joins the high-profile people in Venezuela to have contracted the virus, and it's really, really shocking what is really happening in Venezuela. We are seeing massive numbers in the South American region. The Latin Americas have seen a major high rise in numbers. They are still in the first wave, not even getting closer to the second wave. Rather unfortunate there. But moving on to France, we are also seeing France that we are sure that they've actually moved into the second wave. At the moment, they have recorded 2,500 new cases. Right now, in the last 1 week, they tested over 600,000 people, and 11,600 of those tests came back positive, and it's getting the public health ministry in France worried. Face mask restrictions are very high. They've been speaking about social distancing. Let's see if that would actually help. Before we actually go, let's quickly touch on Chile. Before we go, Chile has seen quite a high rise in COVID-19, and at the moment, Santiago, the capital of Chile, will be lifting its very stringent lockdown today. Whether or not it has actually helped curb the virus is left to be seen. One thing is certain, and one thing that's been prevalent in terms of COVID-19 and lockdowns is the fact that when you lock down a city, you find out that the cases actually drop. As soon as the lockdown is lifted, cases begin to spring up left, right, and center, just like what we've even seen in New Zealand. New Zealand thought they had actually capped the virus, but at the moment, we are seeing more and more cases that are being investigated. Added to the 4, we're now even hearing that there are more, 11, some are saying 21, in terms of COVID-19 there. So we're still trying to get a grip around what is actually going on. But in the meantime, let's turn our attention to South Africa, because the good news is that South Africa has been leading, not just in terms of testing, not just in terms, we've seen the highest number without a doubt in terms of COVID-19 in South Africa, but not just, so South Africa, it's very smart that South Africa have been positioning themselves in terms of vaccines, so that as soon as the vaccine is out, they will be able to cap into it. And let's tell you that Johnson & Johnson will begin trials on a vaccine, phase 3 trials on a vaccine next month, which is September. And also Novavax will begin phase 2 trials. Johnson & Johnson's phase 3 trials of the AD26, that's what they're calling the product that will be administered to people. Right, alongside Novavax also resume phase 2B trial in South Africa for their own virus, the MVX COVID-2373 vaccine that will be administered to people in a phase 2B trial. And these are not just the only things that have happened. Remember, in June, the Oxford University went to the University of Wits in South Africa to begin trials. So this is actually a good news for South Africa, understanding that when it comes to COVID-19 deployment of vaccines, they are up there in the pecking order. And talks have been about the fact that Nigeria have never been on that particular trial list of the WHO, unless we should have been benefiting one way or the other in some of these trials that have been going around the world. We know there are trials in the US, there are trials in the UK, Brazil, Germany, and we are here in South Africa, even Egypt, and nothing like that in Nigeria. Some of those things will need to be reviewed so that when we find ourselves in a jam like this, we will be able to be on that particular list. But before we actually go, the Russian vaccine that they said they had actually discovered and they will be inoculating people with has actually pushed a lot of people to the brink, and there are fears that maybe it might even push up the timetable and maybe make some of those vaccines not really, really healthy. And at the moment, they say it was an error, talking about the Robert Koch Institute in Germany, who claimed that they will be releasing a virus very soon in the autumn, or rather in the fall. In the fall, unfortunately, they came out to say that that paper was an old paper, and not just an old paper. That paper, as a matter of fact, there is no truth to it. So we got to see that at the moment there is a frantic move by those big pharma players in pushing out a vaccine, no thanks to the timetable that has been pushed heavily forward by that Russian vaccine.
Well, we should not compromise safety, on the altar of speed. There's a race, who gets the vaccine first. But I'd like to talk about Sweden and make comparisons with Nigeria, Aaron, and your thoughts. New Zealand, you mentioned. Yeah. New Zealand went 102 days without a case recorded, and all of a sudden they have 14 cases, and they have placed a population of almost 500,000 on new restrictions and lockdown. Why have we not adopted that, strategy? We talk about few local governments out of the 774 local governments in Nigeria having majority of those cases. Why do you think it's difficult for us to actually exercise that precision lockdown we talk so much about?
Now, the truth is this. Do we use our data? There's something in the science fair they call M&E, the monitoring and evaluation, whereby they look at data and they use that data to map out and design how some of this, how care, and not just care alone, or probably in the case of COVID-19, how lockdown should actually be done. In Nigeria, that is not being done. We see that this M&E that is usually done is done by foreign NGOs. And Nigeria, the NCDC have had data on their labs concerning major hotspots and super spreaders, and they are not doing anything about it. They are more concerned with nationwide lockdown, which we have seen, like you've just mentioned, sometimes might not really solve the problem. Localized lockdown, like what we're seeing in New Zealand and also Australia, where Victoria, then New South Wales are being put under lockdown to be able to contain the spread of the virus, not just locking down the entirety of Australia. It's really sad that we're not seeing these styles and these systems that are working being adopted here in Nigeria.
We're almost out of time, but very quickly, the Russians, ironically, despite all the criticisms, they've received orders from 25 countries for about 1 billion doses. And there's a scramble for global supply. But here in Nigeria, we are not doing that. And I think that it's a bit, unfortunate that we're not paying attention in that direction.
All right, thank you, Dr. Watts. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, everybody.